So we're now a few episodes into being able to test out all the module combinations that exist for each of those descendants, trying to find out the best DPS combinations that you can use inside of your game in terms of when it comes to attack and battle mods. Now, obviously a few of these were fairly simple. We only had to deal with one single type. We just had to deal with their actual elements that they were, and we also had to deal with one specific kind of type, whether it was like tech, whether it was singular, all that kind of good stuff. Well, today's episode we're actually going to be branching out into something that's a little bit more complex, and I didn't quite realise how complex this was going to be until I got started, and that's actually going to be for Valby. So we're going to have a look and break down into her stats. This has taken me several hours to actually get right with this one, so hopefully you do appreciate the amount of effort and the amount of numbers that are going to be thrown your way. But because we do have Valby that is going to be using both fusion as well as dimension based skills, the idea behind this is that we want to be able to see what's the best way to apply your damage over time, which is what Valby is pretty much known for, but also to apply for the base kind of damage, especially with our number one skill, which is going to be that bubble bullet. That can deal a decent chunk of damage because it does have a couple of decent multipliers that are behind it, and then it also leaves the damage over time. Now, me personally, I think this is her best skill. Now, obviously, she does have some really good skills, especially in number 2 and number 3 with Plop Plop and Cleanup. Depending on how your playstyle is, depending on what kind of activity you're going into, it will depend on how you're going to be gearing this character up. So we're going to be looking into all the stats, we're going to be looking into all the combinations, and this is just an insane amount of combinations that went for this one because we have to factor in fusion as well as dimension rather than just the one. So it ended up being a much longer kind of testing phase than the rest of the videos that we've done so far. So if you do appreciate this kind of effort, if you did learn something useful with myself, make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back to the channel for more guides that are going to happen just like this. With all that out of the way, let's get into what we did to be able to keep this into a safe kind of environment, a great testing environment so that we can just kind of control the numbers. Now, as usual, we do head into the testing section, we do head into the laboratory. We're able to spawn in one single enemy. This is going to be a level 100 enemy, and we're just going to be using the same enemy going forward over and over again. Fortunately, we can respawn this because with Valby, we do have a couple of statuses that we do, well, at least one status that we need to worry about with most of her kit, and that is going to be the laundry effect. Now, this was one thing that I did have to factor into my test, but actually became such a problem with her number 1 skill. The reason why with this one is that when the puddle hits an enemy, it applies laundry, and this then applies a resistance decrease to non-attribute damage, and every single bit of her kit is going to be non-attribute. So if for some reason if I did chuck out the bullet and the bullet with its radius hit the enemy before the bullet then struck them, I was getting a different number coming from that. So you will probably have a couple of numbers that are going to be floating around that. The easiest way to be able to tell if that is going to be the case is by looking at a comparison between the impact damage and the damage over time, because the damage over time is going to be a constant, that is just going to be applying with laundry constantly, whereas the impact damage potentially could have that factored in a couple times, and I'll be honest with you, it was very difficult for me to be able to get a controlled environment for me to test that out like 100% of the time. So you may find a couple of them just a little bit out, but the easiest way to tell is if the damage over time is the strongest, if it's better than other numbers, then the impact damage is also going to be higher as well. So that was one challenge that I did have to face with this testing. Now, all this footage was taken at level 31 as well, but it was level 31 after I've had a couple of catalysts that were put into it, so all the skills are going to be at their strongest, so this is going to be level 4 for every single one of those. On our inventory, we had no set bonuses when it came to our components, so we didn't have anything filtering into any of these base figures anyway. We did have a look with the Slayer set a little bit later on, but in terms of the base figures that we're going to be looking at first, there are no set bonuses whatsoever. Like I said, we tried to keep it without the laundry effect as well. We did use a purple reactor which was not powered up or anything like that, and we didn't have the mounting or anything like that, so we were just purely looking at base skill power, and then a little bit later down in the kit calculations, as we always do, we then try to pair this up as much as we can so we can see what this actually looks like with a properly filtered build. So I think that kind of covers what I was trying to achieve with this. Like I said, this did take several hours. It was a bit painstaking at times, but you're able to see some of the footage that's in the background so you can see what was going on with the testing and all that. So with all that out of the way, so I've explained that all for yourself, then we can start having a look into the figures. Now, when it came to the base damage for the main bullet, we were looking at around about 33,464 points of damage. When it came to the damage over time, which happens once you apply that laundry effect, this is going to be 1,000 567 points of damage. Our skill 2 damage, our skill 2 ability only applies damage over time. It doesn't actually do any physical damage once it lands, so it just purely applies that laundry effect. This does 1,415 points of damage. Skill 3, this is going to be the one where we're able to leave the trail of water behind ourselves. Once again, purely leaves behind a damage over time. This is going to be 7,002. And then lastly, the ultimate, which is our skill 4. This was very tricky. You cannot actually do testing with this without the laundry effect, and the reason why is because you need that laundry effect for the ability to affect other enemies, and that's going to be then sucking them into the center for them to be able to do that damage. So this one is the only ability that does have the laundry effect with the resistance taken down on it, and at base this was doing 2,471 points of damage every single tick, but this did seem to tick a little bit faster than the other skills, so you can potentially, like if you're lucky with some of the combinations we're going to look at a little bit later on, you could potentially make some decent use out of this ability, but this does require you to use your other skills in your arsenal before you can then swap over to this, and that's without looking at some of the Transcendence mods. So taking a quick look at our attack mods first, and you're able to see on the screen right now as to how this all kind of affected. Now you will see Fusion Specialist and you will see Dimension Specialist along with Focus on Fusion and Focus on Dimension. What's interesting to note about these ones though is that because these are they are catered specifically towards certain types of moves, you'll notice that there are going to be cases where percentages increases are absolutely doing nothing here, and you're going to see this most notably in the first line, which is our Fusion Specialist, not affecting our skill 2 and skill 3. And that's quite rightly so. That does check out because that ability is dimension based, so the Fusion Specialist is not going to be filtering into that. Same with the Dimension Specialist, but it's going to be the other way around. It actually wasn't affecting our skill 1 and it wasn't affecting our skill 4, so this is purely going to be helping with plop plop as well as cleanup. So you know, it depends on which way you want to base this build around as to whether you want to use those mods, but I will be discussing like a couple of combinations that I'm going to suggest to you a little bit later on in this video. But we're able to see that Technician is able to help across the board. We're able to see Maximize Power and Skill Simplification is also doing the exact same. So, you know, it's just generic stuff. It basically does exactly what it says on paper, and there's no funny business that's going on in the background. Now when we swap over to the battle side of things, we're going to be able to see something a little bit different because most of this is actually skill power based. So we're going to see skill power increases, which, you know, just kind of help us across the board most of the time. So you can see that we've got pretty much percentage increases just across the board with this one. Now obviously there are two varying degrees, so depending on what you're actually trying to maximize out in your build will depend on what kind of mod you want to go for. If you're looking to do your Bubble Bullet first, then Fusion Master and anything that's going to help you out with Fusion is going to be the way to go. And then once again, if you're looking to use your skill 2 and 3 a little bit more, then Dimension is going to be the way to go for that one. But that's just the mods by themselves. Obviously we're not going to necessarily be getting away with that when we're out and about in the field. So how does this work with combinations? And I'll be honest with you, this is just going to be an information dump overload. I'm going to put the graph up on the, well, I'm about to say graph, I'm going to put the table up on the screen so you can get an idea as to how this was all done in what order. It's going to be a lot of numbers, so yeah, if you can able to read that, if you want to take a screenshot, feel free. You know, just that might be easier reading for you. But you can see that we do have varying percentages across the board. Now this is the one that took me a little bit longer to be able to get away with when it came to the testing, because it was around about here that we did notice that the laundry effect was going to be affecting here. So a lot of them were caught. There may be one or two that did slip through the radar, but I did do my best to try and catch as much as possible. So this should be as accurate as physically possible when it came to this. I did test a couple of them several times over rather than just doing the one single test. So obviously combinations, you know, you've got that information in front of you. I mean, that's all well and good, but how does this actually kind of work once we put this into a sorted kind of order? Now, this one will vary depending on how you actually want to run your build, like I've said, depending on if you want to use the skill 1 ability a bit more, or if you want to rely on your skills 2 and 3. But how I've sorted this one is going to be based on the damage over time, because that was consistent, so we are able to spot if there are any that are a little bit out of whack. But we can also use this to, you know, the skill 1 damage over time was a little bit more effective compared compared to the rest of the stuff that's in the kit, and I think this does a little bit, it's a little easier to be able to use. It's definitely the more offensive based skill and of the whole kit that Valby does actually sport. So I've done it by this. If you want me to change it around, feel free to let me know. I will quite happily sort it into the other skills as well, and I'll drop that as a pinned comment, but just let me know if that's something that you're interested in. So as we can see here, that we do have maximize power and maximize skill, once again taking the top spot, and that's because that is going to be the most amount of increase to skill power, as well as skill power modifier that we can actually possess in this game, just from 2 single mods. So these ones are pretty much always going to be at the top. That does mean that you are going to be facing an extra 100% cooldown time on all of your abilities, so this isn't always going to be the best one to go for. But the reason why maximize power does feature so prominently at the top though, is that it's because it's increasing the modifiers across the board, and that is going to be helping out with every single one of your skills, rather than going into something like non-attribute, or being able to, sorry, not non-attribute, sorry, going into fusion or going into dimension, for example. If you go into one of those, you're only going to be helping out half of your kit, rather than something that's going to be like maximize power, skill simplification, non-attribute, focus on non-attribute, etc., which is going to be helping you out across the board. So that's the reason why we're going to see those at the top of the table, and that's also going to be the reason why I'm going to be suggesting some of these to take forward into the next part of the video. Now, unfortunately, compared to like the last video that we did get to see, which I believe was with Lepic, we did get a couple of like green ones that actually had beneficial extras attached to their mods near the top, but this unfortunately is not the case when it comes to Valby. It is quite hampering if you do want to have a beneficial kind of effect, with, like, for example, less cooldown, or if you just want to ignore any kind of issues, some like any negative downsides that come with some of the mods that do exist in this. So you're going to see that most of the top of the table, in fact I think it's going to be that at least the top 12 are going to be covered with some form of negative kind of like downside going to be sporting into your build. So if you feel like you can work your way around that, brilliant. If you don't feel like you can, fully understand. Obviously some of the cooldowns can be worked around. I think that we do have some fairly low cooldowns when it comes to Valby skills, but I do think that maybe the easiest one to be able to work around is going to be that negative 25% to our MP total, and once again that's going to be the reason why we're going to be taking it forward into the rest of the video. Now, as we always do, we do have a look at what happens if we start introducing a reactor to this. Now, the problem we do have here, once again, is that we do have to go into either fusion or into dimension, because we can't have a single reactor that's going to be covering all of our bases. So in this case, I did go for one into fusion, because that's the reason why I sorted my table the way I did. And in this case, we're going to be having around about 25,484 points of skill power into our fusion, and 21,237 points of skill power into our dimension skill. So you can get an idea as to how these kind of comparisons kind of work. Now, the 4 that I did take from this, the idea was to be able to take the very top performer, which is in this case is maximize power, maximize skill. We're going to be taking the second best performer, which is maximize power and non-attribute specialist. We're going to be grabbing the top performer when it comes to the negative 25% MP, so nothing that's going to be affecting our cooldowns. In this case, is going to be skill simplification and fusion master. And then lastly, we're going to take the best performer that doesn't have any kind of negative downsides whatsoever. And in that case, that's going to be fusion specialist and fusion master. So we've took all of those 4 combinations and just took them forward. So we put them into the reactor to see what this would do. And as you can see with the figures that are going to exist on the board, nothing really kind of like changes. If anything, it's just going to be exaggerating a little bit more, kind of like this, the difference, the gap that's between all of these combinations, and you're going to see maximize power, maximize skill just kind of run away with it at this point. So you can see here that you know, maximize power, maximize skill is offering a 454% boost to your impact damage on your bubble bullet. We do have a 1,672% increase to the damage over time from that exact same skill as well, but this is also going to be boosting up both of our skills for skill 2 and skill 3, and this is going to be doing the most amount that we can do as well. As you can see, just to give you an idea as to how this kind of works compared to that if you go into fusion specialist, though, you can see that when skill 2 damage over time, we're getting a 1,497% increase to the amount of damage we'll be doing. And then if we go into fusion specialist and fusion master, because we're focusing into bubble bullet, for example, we're only doing 4,066. So this is a huge difference between going from just skill 1 and skill 2, which means that if you do go for the Fusion Specialist and the Fusion Master, there is a very good chance you're never going to be activating skill 2 or skill 3 unless you're in a very dire situation. It's kind of like you're pigeonholing yourself into one of those. So I do recommend that either Maximize Power or Skill Simplification should probably be in one of your builds. It's just a case of if you can manage the cooldowns or if you can manage the negative downside of the mana pool as well. And then lastly, just to see how this all kind of filters out once we start adding extra things in, we do actually add in this Slayer set on top, and that's going to give us an extra 26.1% to our skill power, and we get to see what those numbers kind of produce, which is going to be on your screen right now. Now obviously it does increase a little bit better than just 26% across the board, so you're going to be able to see things like, you know, we're pushing close to that 2000% mark when it comes to the damage over time on our skill 1 with our bubble bullet, and you know, it's quite nice to put figures just across the board pretty much. You can see how it as to how much we've kind of like jumped up when we had a look at the base ability, and how just building up into this kind of build is just kind of, it's made the numbers just a little bit more exaggerated as well. Now obviously this isn't the final damage, this doesn't mean that it's just going to stay at this kind of number. There are other ways that we can recommend to build into this as well. Most of the time it's going to be something like, you know, you could use Lethal Infection, but I think the main one is going to be Decimator. Decimator just increases your skill power modifier as you kill enemies that have been infected with debuffs, and because Laundry is treated as debuff, Decimator is absolutely huge for being able to leave puddles of water and just let the enemies just kind of like do their thing and just fall over from that as well. Now, it was recommended to me to be able to put some kind of build up on the screen for you when it comes to skill based, but unfortunately I'm not going to do that just yet. The reason why is because I am currently working in the background. I've recently unlocked an Ultimate Valby. I do plan on doing a proper build video to be able to help you out when it comes to that side of things, so I'm not going to show you something that's just a work in progress. I want to show you something that I'm happy with, so for the time being, just keep your ears out and just be able to keep your eyes peeled on the channel. There will be something coming up in the next couple of weeks. As for my final recommendation as to what you should be running when it comes to Valby in terms of being able to use for all of her kit, I've got to be honest with you, I feel like Maximize Power and Maximize Skill pretty much covers all your bases. The problem with that is that 100% cooldown. You know, Maximize Power and a non-attribute specialist, it does try to keep up. It's not too far behind at all, and that does come with a 50% cooldown issue on it as well. So if you are able to maximize into your cooldown, like just to be able to bring it down on Valby's build, then maybe Maximize Power and non-attribute specialist would be the way to go if you're planning to use all of the skills. But you know, if it is a case that you're just not too fussed about that, if you do plan on just using the one single skill and then just being able to leave just water puddles everywhere, then Fusion Specialist, Fusion Master isn't too bad. Just be aware that you're not going to be using your skill 2 or skill 3 at all during that fight, or at least not effectively. But there we go, that wraps it up on the video. That brings all the values to you. So let me know in the comment section down below, are you surprised about this? How do you currently rock your Valby? Do you primarily go for your skill 1 and skill 4? Or do you primarily go into your skills 2 and 3? And if that is the case, how do you currently rock her? And have you changed anything after watching this video? Massive thank you for making it this far in the video. Leave a comment down below as well which Descendant you would like to be able to see next. I do have a couple of calls for Isomo, so I definitely will be working on that. I do think that's going to be very complex considering that his second ability, it seems to stack up extra damage, and I want to see if there are other mods or if there's anything funky going on in the background that increases the amount of damage that does as well. But of course, that just leaves me all to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.